This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
Joining me now is Scott Hamilton. He is the interim CEO of the Urban League of Arkansas, and he is an old-time friend of mine. Good to have you with us, Scott. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Roby. Yeah,
Right.
appreciate it.
We're at the scene of where some of the protests have been in Little Rock here, right at the corner of 7th and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. Before we get into what has been going on in terms of some of the civil unrest here, I want you to talk about what the Urban League does traditionally and where you guys have been bringing the organization back from.
Yeah, absolutely, Roby, and I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time and having us here. So the Urban League is one of the oldest civil rights organizations in our country. Headquartered in D.C., there's about 90 affiliates throughout the state, throughout the country, if you will. Arkansas being one of the only full state affiliates. Most affiliates are city or county associated. But what the Urban League does is really focuses on equity, economic empowerment, and social justice. And our focus is really to make sure that our policies, our systems, our processes, and quite frankly, things that go on in our society hit those spaces. We do that through programs, we do it through advocacy, we do it through partnerships. But again, the main focus is really, again, in that space of economic empowerment, equity, equality, and social justice. So as you can imagine, where we are today is really high on our agenda and right in our bag of what we do.
Yeah. This weekend, we saw peaceful protests in the city and across the nation. We saw some protests turn to violence. We saw some police officers walking with protesters at times. We saw them cracking down on protesters at times. The bottom line to me is that this is obviously mainly stimulated from the George Floyd murder that was captured on video, a white cop strangling a black man that was subdued. Do you think this is kind of a Rodney King moment for the country?
Yeah, interesting analogy. And I think, you go back, Rodney King was what, 30 years ago now?
92, I think.
Yeah, 92, give or take. And so I think we've had many of these moments. I think, in fact, these are milestones, as I say, on a continuum. I mean, this is just part of our culture. This is part of our society, and it's part of America. And this is what are instances like this that I believe really heighten the underlying challenges that we've never resolved in this country. And so there's no question what happened with George Floyd really highlighted those issues because we saw it on video. These days we have the benefit of video real time where folks can see things that have occurred for many years. But it gets to a point where it's very difficult to question what you see, unless you want to question your own eyes, and not have to depend on the narrative of that someone else may bring. So yeah, there's no question in the last 30, 60, 90 days, we've had several events that are kind of similar in this space, in the base of it, in terms of how many believe is the causation, if you will, of it. But to see real-time video, what we saw with Mr. Floyd is devastating. It's tragic. It's unforgettable for anyone on this earth.
So much of what I see in my social media feeds, and I have a broad variety of political perspectives in my social media feeds, black, white, Republican, Democrat, older, younger, around the state. A lot of people are talking about white privilege. A lot of people are talking about black perspective. Does it boil down to something that simple to you?
Well, those are definitions. Those are defining ways to look at what the issues are. Certainly, is there a white privilege in our society? No question. Are there different perspectives that different people of backgrounds, culture, race, religion, ideologies, whatever, there's all different perspectives on really the same issue that's going on. And so what we don't do a good job of, in my opinion, in this country is treating everyone as if they're just a human. Basic needs, basic wants, you ask anybody, there's some pretty simple things that people want. Now, how we go about it is where the challenge is. One of the new terms, not one that I really like, is the underserved. Well, underserved means there's somebody that's overserved, right? There's not a balance. That's just the way life is. So will we ever resolve that? Not likely. But I think the opportunity is that when folks begin to really recognize that these differences do exist, there is a privilege group. There is a unprivileged group. How do these groups begin to navigate to say, let's find a balance? They'll never be perfect. But I think when there's an acceptance and some base fundamental agreements in terms of how our society is structured currently, where we've come from, where we're trying to go, that's where we'll be able to start to effectuate some change.
You and I, and we talk about this often, you and I have been friends for 40 years.
You weren't supposed to say that.
We'll
That makes us
confess
old.
to everybody that we used to sneak off of a high school campus together and risk detention hall on a Saturday. But we escaped. We survived that. All that to say is that we've had a long-standing friendship,
Absolutely.
junior high, high school, college, and beyond. I still feel like we're having a conversation that we've had for the last 40 years of our lifetimes. I know it went on before that for generations before us. To me, it is still lack of experience of somehow a white person cannot understand what it feels like to be a black person and have some of the inequities that are out there. How do we, and I think that there are black people that don't understand the whole white perspective on some things too. How do you get people to experience these things that are causing the differences? Because until you've walked a mile in someone's shoes, I don't think you totally get it.
So, yeah, and a great point, Roby, because you're absolutely right. You know, we've had these type conversations back when we were in high school. Our parents had them, their parents. It's listening. It's finding a willingness to listen. You know, people talk about common ground, things like that, and that's great. There's a lot of ways you can talk about it. At the end of the day, it's just good old-fashioned listening. And listening is not hearing somebody. Listening is really taking the time to delve into what that person is saying. This is not rocket science. I mean, this doesn't take a PhD in any form to be able to understand what issues are there. I mean, we could just sit here and just rattle off example upon example upon example of where these differences happen. But until people listen about what could be, should be, what happened, what occurred, and really care about what that other person is saying, you got to get inside of that person's needs, their emotions. And that's where true listening happens. A lot of times people have conversations and it stops right there at that surface. But if that conversation goes deeper, hey, tell me more. How did that make you feel? You know what? Give me how do you explain this to your kids? You know, how does a black parent today explain to their 6-year-old what's going on? How does a white parent today explain to their 6-year-old what's going on? In a vacuum, they're going to be very different conversations because there will be different impacts and expectations and realities for both of those different groups. Same thing with our Latinx community, same thing with our Asian community. They're all different perspectives, as you said earlier, of the same issue. And that's where that conversation has to happen so that everyone understands, okay, this is what I shared with my kid. I understand this is what you shared with your kid. Wow, they're common, but they're different. Now, that conversation on that difference has to happen, but it has to be real. It has to be genuine. It has to be heartfelt. It has to be a willingness to be wrong. It has to be a willingness to be vulnerable, to say, I don't know. I don't understand. You may not like certain things that one is saying, but until you can understand that person's innate needs, fears, frustrations, hurts, or thoughts, we're not getting anywhere.
You're talking about empathy is what you're talking about. Somebody's got to be able to empathize with another person's condition.
Sure.
Because here's what I think I experience a lot from people who want to claim that they're open-minded about race relations, or however you want to define this. I listened, I heard, I understand. I just don't agree.
Right.
I don't agree
Right.
with that perspective. His life or her life is not that tough, you know. They do have all the opportunities that they have. I don't know how you get people beyond that point when there's not the, you mentioned the word willingness, and that may be part of it. I'm not asking people to roll over on their positions in life, but there's a barrier that has to be broken there. I don't have the solution to that. I think if we did, we would have solved this problem many decades ago. But I mean, am I hitting the nail on the head on this? I mean,
absolutely, yeah. And I think that is a great statement, because you do hear that. You know, I heard this, but I don't agree. Well, that means you didn't hear it. because there's not an asking to agree. You can never agree. I mean, there's certain things that you fundamentally may feel differently about, and that's fine. That's okay. But if it boils down to whether or not people are looking for agreement, we'll never get anywhere because it's not a matter. There's a lot of things that aren't even possible for agreement. So again, that whole I'm open to, that's first step, right? But just being open to and thinking in your mind to what point that you want to then interject your thoughts and feelings on what someone else is telling you, it's done. You have to be completely open. You have to be completely vulnerable. You have to have that willingness to feel bad.
That's going to sound one-sided to some people, though. That's going to sound like a white person needs to listen to a black or a brown person.
Let me give you on that perspective.
Okay.
Absolutely, but that's not the case. A black person has to do the same from a white perspective. If there are perspectives that whites are saying that that believe things are this way, or this is the experience that a white person has had, a black person cannot come back and attack that or say, well, that's why you don't understand me. No, it goes both ways. And so there also has to be a willingness for a black person to understand that myths and perceptions about white people are wrong. There are a lot of myths and perceptions that black folks have about white folks that are just absolutely wrong. I mean, the rumor is that all white folks are rich. Well, I know a bunch of broke white folks. I know a bunch of rich white folks. I know a bunch of rich black folks. I know a bunch of broke black folks like me. So what I'm saying is that, it goes both ways. And again, that's what we have to be careful of, is deciding at what point does someone not get it. And then it's our job to continue on, not to get frustrated, not to get sensitive about things, because it is a sensitive topic.
Yeah.
But it's got to go both ways. There has to be a willingness of both parties to really be open and to acknowledge that they can be wrong.
So communication is clearly key to finding progress in what is breaking down our society right now. It has been breaking down our society. And again, as you kind of indicated, this is a continuum. This is something we keep coming back to again and again and again and again, that it ebbs and flows. It's obviously going to be greater than the Urban League, but what can the Urban League do to facilitate that? And what else is needed? Who else and what else is needed to advance some things?
Sure. Yeah. At the Urban League, that's our goal, is to really to try to broker relationships, broker conversations, really create if you'd say a stable platform where we can hopefully engage interactions, be it conversations, getting people together in similar spaces, some education where folks can begin to learn about each other. Coupled with that, we hope that we put out a good example that people can do these things individually, right? If you're, well, unfortunately, we're not in school environment as we typically are, but at school, making sure that when a child has a birthday party, the parents got to say, hey, all these kids look like us. What's up with that? We've got to put that out there. Kids don't learn things other than what we teach them. The only thing we're born with, I think, is the fear of falling and fear of something else. I forgot what it was. But at the end of the day, we have to make those courageous conversations. We have to be willing to see it. We see this when we walk into stores or places where we see everyone is just kind of the same race or same culture background. Our minds have to start not being so comfortable with that. Now, my wife and I were talking this morning, just this very conversation, is that are there places where you will see just a singular race, and is that okay? It is. Because there are times that folks will say, okay, I just want to be around a bunch of black folks. There's a time when people say, I just want to be around a bunch of white folks, a bunch of Asian folks. I mean, that is fine. That should not be our norm. That should not be our standard. Because amongst ourselves, we've got to make sure that we're talking about, okay, how do we improve our society? We can't do it, and we being everybody, not just one culture, not one race. Everyone can't fix our society by ourselves. Getting back to this whole underserved and then the overserved, that's a great way to look at stuff. I mean, everything is a balance. So if one feels like that needs to be balanced, and we all should, then what are we doing to make sure that happens? And those are the efforts that start to work. And when you see someone doing it, then the next person say, I can do a little bit too. Little bit adds up to a lot. I mean, if we think that we have to do really big efforts individually, we'll never get anywhere. So what we hope again at the Urban League is that we can begin to set some examples, create a safe space for conversation, identify other entities that we can collaborate with, and begin to have these type conversations and efforts that are more productive than some of the things that we've seen.
Let's continue this conversation in the days to come.
Absolutely.
All right,
Thank
Scott
you.
Hamilton with the Urban League of Arkansas, thank you.
Thank you, Roby. I appreciate it.
That's all for today's program. We'll see you next time.
Each day, the promise of our nation begins again. Arkansas and America, moving forward. I help make that promise a reality. It's not for everyone, but people everywhere depend on us.
Oh, I love you too, sweetie.
Trucking delivers, or everything stops. And that's what drives me.
I did.
You'll find us at the end of a lot of long country roads, covering over 60% of the great state of Arkansas. Our 17 electric distribution cooperatives are working day and night to provide reliable, affordable power to over 500,000 homes, farms, and businesses, just like yours. The Electric Cooperatives of Arkansas, your local energy partners.